The massive alien ship hung in Earth's orbit like a silvery teardrop, its surface catching the sun's rays and scattering them in rainbow patterns across the void. Inside the United Nations building in New York, Ambassador Reed straightened his tie for the 100th time. He was about to become humanity's first official representative to the Galactic Council. The room fell silent as the alien delegation entered. Their tall, slender forms moved with a grace that made them appear to float rather than walk. The lead alien, who called himself the High Counselor, stood nearly 8 feet tall with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the fluorescent lights. "We welcome you, children of Earth," the High Counselor spoke through their translation device. His voice carried a musical quality that made even these simple words sound like poetry. "We have watched your species for some time now." Reed nodded politely, maintaining his diplomatic composure despite the slight condescension in the alien's tone. The gathered human diplomats exchanged glances, noting how the aliens referred to them as children. "Your world has shown remarkable progress for such a young species," the High Counselor continued. "We believe you are ready for integration into the galactic community, under our guidance and protection. Of course." Reed cleared his throat. "We appreciate your offer, High Counselor. However, humanity has its own established systems of governance and—" The High Counselor raised a hand, the gesture somehow both elegant and dismissive. "We understand your pride in your achievements, but consider, your species barely lives past 100 years. Your bodies are fragile, requiring constant rest and sustenance. You cannot even survive the basic rigors of space without extensive protection." Another alien, the first speaker of their military council, stepped forward. He towered over Reed, his silver eyes scanning the human with what appeared to be gentle amusement. "We have reviewed your species' capabilities. Your strongest warriors can barely lift twice their body weight. Your fastest runners would be outpaced by our younglings. Even your most advanced weapons rely on primitive chemical reactions." Reed maintained his diplomatic smile, but his fingers tightened slightly on the edge of his podium. He had served in the diplomatic corps for 20 years, and he recognized patronizing behavior when he saw it. These aliens viewed humans as pets. Clever pets, perhaps, but pets nonetheless. "We would be happy to share our assessment with you," the High Counselor said, gesturing to a holographic display that appeared in the center of the room. It showed various human activities: athletes competing, construction workers building, soldiers training. "Your species shows admirable dedication despite your limitations. This is why we believe you would benefit from our protection." The human diplomats watched as their entire species was neatly categorized and dismissed as harmless. None of them spoke up to correct the aliens' assumptions. After all, being underestimated had its advantages. "We thank you for your thorough analysis," Reed responded carefully. "We look forward to learning more about each other as our relationship develops." The meeting continued for several hours, with the aliens outlining their plans for humanity's integration into the galactic community. They spoke of trading posts, cultural exchanges, and technological gifts, all carefully monitored and controlled, of course. They never once mentioned military cooperation or defensive pacts. In their minds, humans were simply too fragile for such considerations. As the aliens finally departed, Reed stood at the window watching their shuttle ascend toward their ship. One of his colleagues joined him, speaking softly. "They think we're harmless." Reed nodded slowly. "They do. Should we tell them?" Reed thought about human history, about the wars, the strategies, the inventions born of conflict. He thought about how humans had learned to split the atom, to wage war across continents, to fight in conditions that would kill most species. He thought about how they had then chosen to create laws to limit these capabilities, not because they had to, but because they chose to. "No," he said finally. "Let them figure it out on their own. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones you learn for yourself." The alien ship disappeared into the darkness of space, leaving behind a humanity that was far more dangerous than they realized, not because of their strength or speed, but because they had learned to be dangerous and then chosen to be peaceful instead. 6 months after first contact, Captain James Miller stood at his new post aboard the Stellar Empire's flagship space station. At 8 miles wide, the station was the largest structure humans had ever seen. Its curved halls were filled with beings from 100 different worlds, and now, finally, Earth. Miller watched as another group of alien diplomats walked past his security desk. They smiled at him. At least he thought they were smiling. In that same way people smile at mall security guards. To them, his position was purely decorative. Guard Miller, a tall alien supervisor named Blue Eye, approached his station. Like most of his species, Blue Eye moved with liquid grace and stood nearly twice Miller's height. There seems to be some confusion. You have submitted a request for combat training facilities. That's correct, sir, Miller nodded, standing straight in his Earth Federation uniform. Standard procedure for security personnel to maintain combat readiness. Blue Eye made a sound that might have been a laugh. But surely you understand. Our security systems are automated. Your position here is merely to make your fellow humans feel comfortable. There is no need for such aggressive activities. Miller kept his face neutral, though his jaw tightened slightly. In his 15 years as a Marine, he'd learned when to push and when to wait. Of course, sir. I'll withdraw the request. Later that day, Miller sat in the station's observation deck, watching Earth spin slowly in the distance. Another human, tech specialist Lisa Brown, dropped into the seat beside him. "They still treating you like a mall cop?" she asked, offering him a coffee from her thermos. Miller took a grateful sip. "Worse. Today they suggested I might be happier working in the botanical gardens. Apparently, my gentle nature would be better suited there." Lisa snorted. "Tell that to the pirates you took down off the coast of Somalia." She paused, looking thoughtful. "They really have no idea, do they, about what humans are capable of?" "No," Miller said, watching a group of alien children playing some sort of floating ball game. "They've decided we're harmless because we're smaller and weaker than them. Classic mistake." The station's lighting shifted, indicating the start of the night cycle. Most of the aliens began moving toward their quarters, their movements elegant and unhurried. They lived in a universe where violence was rare and easily controlled by their advanced technology. "You know what's funny?" Miller said, finishing his coffee. "They got all these advanced weapons, but they've never had to fight room to room, never had to adapt when their tech fails. They think warfare is about being biggest and strongest." Lisa nodded. "Should have seen their faces when I told them humans used to fight with pointy sticks. They thought I was joking." A soft alarm chimed through the station. End of shift. Miller stood, straightening his uniform. "They'll figure it out eventually. Probably not the way they'd like to." As they walked back to their quarters, they passed several alien security officers testing new weapons. The devices were beautiful, all sleek curves and glowing lights. The aliens handled them with casual confidence, never imagining they might one day need to fight without them. Miller thought about his own training. Hand-to-hand combat, survival skills, improvised weapons. He thought about human history, about soldiers fighting in mud and snow, about guerrilla warfare and in desperate last stands. The aliens saw humans as weak because they couldn't comprehend the strength it took to fight when everything was against you. "Sleep well, Guard Miller," Blue Eye called as they passed his station. "Perhaps tomorrow you can help us organize the children's recreation period." "Looking forward to it, sir," Miller replied politely. Let them think him harmless. Let them believe humans were gentle creatures who needed protection. Sometimes, the best advantage was being underestimated. In his quarters that night, Miller cleaned his standard-issue knife, the one the aliens thought was ceremonial, and smiled slightly. Humans weren't peaceful because they had to be. They were peaceful because they knew exactly what the alternative looked like. The attack came during the station's night cycle. Captain Miller was reviewing security feeds when the first explosion rocked the lower decks. Red warning lights flooded the corridors as the station's AI announced a hull breach in Section 7. All security personnel to Command Center. Blue Eye's voice came through the station's comm system. Human staff, please remain in your quarters for your safety. Miller ignored the order, already moving. Years of combat experience had taught him to read between the lines of chaos. The explosions were too precise, too well-timed. This wasn't an accident. He reached the security hub just as Blue Eye was organizing response teams. The alien commander looked surprised to see him. Guard Miller, you were instructed to. Sir, Miller cut in, scanning the security feeds. Those explosions are diversions. Look at the pattern. The massive display screen showed fires spreading across the lower decks. Alien security teams rushed to contain them. Their movements precise and practiced. Too practiced, Miller thought. This is not your concern, Blue Eye said firmly. Our automated systems will. Another explosion cut him off, bigger than the others. The security feeds from Deck 12 went dark. They're using our own security protocols against us, Miller said, pointing to the screen. They knew exactly where your teams would respond. They're herding your people away from their real target. Impossible, one of the alien officers said. Our systems are perfect. No one cooled. The station's lights flickered and died. Emergency power kicked in, casting everything in a dim red glow. Miller's heart rate quickened, not from fear, but from the familiar rush of combat. Your perfect systems just went down, he said, checking his sidearm. And I'm betting your security teams don't train for fighting in the dark. Blue Eye's skin had paled to a lighter shade. Our weapons require power to. Of course they do, Miller muttered. He keyed his personal comm unit. Lisa, you reading me? Already on it. Lisa's voice crackled back. Station's main reactor is offline. Backup systems are being systematically disabled. These guys know what they're doing. Miller turned to Blue Eye. Sir, request permission to assist. His tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. The alien commander hesitated. Around them, more alerts flashed as systems continued to fail. Reports flooded in of armed intruders moving through the darkened corridors. You cannot, Blue Eye said, but his voice wavered. It's too dangerous. Your species is not built for combat. A new alarm blared. The station's life support systems were starting to fail. Through the security feeds that still worked, they could see panic spreading. Alien civilians huddled in corridors, their advanced technology useless without power. Sir, Miller said quietly, right now you've got hostiles who've disabled your tech, blocked your standard responses, and are probably counting on your security teams being lost without their powered weapons. He checked his knife. The one they thought was ceremonial. What you need isn't better technology. You need someone who knows how to fight dirty. Blue Eye looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. You truly believe you can help? Humans have been fighting in the dark since before we had fire, Miller said, and we've gotten pretty good at it. A scream echoed through the corridors, closer this time. The intruders were moving toward the command center. Blue Eye's shoulders slumped slightly. Very well. What do you suggest? Miller was already moving toward the door, his mind shifting into the combat mode that felt as natural as breathing. First, we need to gather any humans on security staff. Then I'm going to show you why my species invented the phrase, hit them where they least expect it. He paused at the door, looking back at the aliens who had dismissed him as harmless for so long. And sir, after this is over, we're going to have a long talk about updating your combat training protocols. In the dim red emergency lighting, Captain Miller led his makeshift team through the station's maintenance tunnels. Behind him, Blue Eye and 3 other alien security officers tried to move quietly, though their height made it awkward in the cramped space. This is undignified, one of the aliens whispered. We should confront them directly. Direct confrontation is exactly what they want, Miller replied, his voice barely audible. He'd gathered 4 other human security staff. all with military backgrounds. They moved like shadows, their movements efficient and practiced. In warfare, you don't give the enemy what they expect. An explosion rumbled above them. Through the ceiling grates, they could see armed figures moving in formation. Their weapons were familiar, stolen Stellar Empire technology. Miller held up his hand, signaling a halt. He turned to Blue Eye. How many civilians in the central hub? At least 300, Blue Eye replied. But we cannot reach them. The terrorists have sealed all main corridors. Miller smiled slightly. Main corridors, yes, but they forgot about the waste management access. He pointed to a narrow shaft. Humans designed these systems. We insisted on manual access points in case of power failure. But that shaft is barely wide enough for... Blue Eye stopped, understanding dawning. For a human. Miller nodded to Lisa, who was already pulling up the station schematics on a handheld device. Their leader will be in the Environmental Control Center. It's the only place to maintain the lockdown. We go in through the maintenance shafts, split their forces, free the hostages. This is not proper combat protocol, one of the alien officers protested. No, Miller agreed, checking his weapons. This is guerrilla warfare. Humans wrote the book on it. He turned to his human team. Remember, non-lethal takedowns when possible. We still have to answer to the Geneva Convention. Blue Eye tilted his head. Geneva Convention. Rules of warfare, Miller explained, helping Lisa secure her climbing gear. Laws humans created to limit what we can do in combat. You created laws to limit warfare. The aliens' confusion was clear. Why would you restrict your combat capabilities? Another explosion shook the station. Miller's expression turned grim. Because without those laws, what I'm about to do would be much, much worse. He checked his comm unit. Team 1, through the waste management shaft. Team 2, up through the ventilation system. Classic pincer movement. The human security teams split up, disappearing into different access points. Blue Eye watched in amazement as they contorted themselves through spaces he would have thought impossible to navigate. Stay here, Miller told the alien officers. When you hear the signal, move in through the main corridor. The terrorists won't expect an attack from 3 directions. What signal? Blue Eye asked. Miller's smile was wolf-like in the red emergency lighting. Trust me, you'll know it. The next 10 minutes were a lesson in human warfare that the aliens would never forget. Through security feeds that still work, they watched as Miller's team systematically dismantled the terrorist operation. The humans moved with lethal efficiency, using the station's architecture against their enemies. They appeared from air vents, maintenance hatches, and spaces the terrorists had dismissed as too small for combat. They used improvised weapons. Tools turned clubs, maintenance chemicals turned smoke bombs. This is, Blue Eye whispered, watching Miller disarm a terrorist twice his size using leverage and momentum. This is not simple combat. This is how humans fight. Lisa's voice came through the comm. When we're outgunned, we get creative. The signal, when it came, was unmistakable. A cascade of maintenance hatches blew open simultaneously, creating a thunderous distraction that sent the terrorists into chaos. By the time Blue Eye led his team in through the main corridor, most of the fighting was over. They found Miller in the Environmental Control Center, the terrorist leader secured and disarmed. The human captain was treating a wound on his arm, looking tired but satisfied. How? Blue Eye asked simply. Humans learned to fight before we had advanced weapons, Miller said, wincing as he bandaged his arm. We learned to use everything around us, to adapt, to survive. Your people rely on technology. We rely on experience. He looked at the alien commander seriously. And we created the Geneva Convention because we learned exactly how brutal that experience could make us. The High Counselor's chambers fell into a stunned silence as the holographic display finished showing footage from the station attack. The gathered alien leaders stared at the recording of Miller and his team's efficient takedown of the terrorists. "This cannot be correct," the first speaker said, his silver eyes wide. They were outnumbered, outgunned, facing superior opponents. And they won. Blue Eye finished. He stood before the council, still bearing minor injuries from the attack. Not only did they win, they did so while deliberately holding back. The High Counselor leaned forward in his seat. "Explain this. Geneva Convention again." Ambassador Reed stepped forward, his diplomatic demeanor masking the gravity of what he was about to reveal. After centuries of warfare, humans created international laws to limit the horrors of combat. Rules about treatment of prisoners, prohibited weapons, protection of civilians. "You needed laws," another council member interrupted, "to tell you not to harm prisoners." "No," Miller said from his position beside Reed. "We needed laws to define exactly how far we could go, because history showed us we could go much, much further." The room's holographic system activated again, this time showing scenes from human history. World War I trenches. World War I cities in ruins. Nuclear explosions rising like artificial suns. By the stars. The first speaker whispered, "Your species did this. To itself." "We did," Reed acknowledged. "And then we chose to create rules to prevent it from happening again." Miller stepped forward, calling up more recent footage. "These are modern military training exercises." The images showed soldiers practicing urban warfare, guerrilla tactics, survival skills. Every technique we used on the station came from centuries of human conflict. The High Counselor's skin had paled significantly. The maintenance shafts, the improvised weapons, standard human tactics, Miller explained. "When we can't overpower an enemy, we outthink them. When we can't outthink them, we outblast them." "But your bodies are so fragile," one council member protested. "Your lives so short." "Which means we learn to fight smarter," Miller said. "We adapt. We improvise. And then, because we understand exactly how dangerous that makes us, we create rules to limit ourselves." Reed activated another hologram, this one showing the actual text of the Geneva Conventions. These laws weren't created by a species that was naturally peaceful. They were created by a species that had mastered warfare so completely that we terrified ourselves. The council chamber fell silent again as the aliens processed this information. They had assumed humanity's physical limitations made them harmless. Now they were realizing those very limitations had forced humans to become more dangerous, not less. "There's more," Blue Eye said quietly. "Show them the training simulations." New images appeared. Human military exercises, combat scenarios, warfare in every possible environment. Soldiers fighting in deserts, jungles, Arctic wastes. Urban combat, underwater operations, zero-gravity training. Your species prepares for war, everywhere. The first speaker's voice shook slightly. "We prepare for everything," Miller corrected, "because history taught us that lack of preparation costs lives." The High Counselor stood, his usual grace forgotten in his shock. "All this time, we thought you were peaceful because you had to be. Because you were too weak to fight." "No," Reed said softly. "We're peaceful because we choose to be. Because we've seen the alternative, and we decided to be better." Miller stepped forward again. "The terrorists on the station thought the same thing you did, that humans were harmless. They learned what happens when you back humans into a corner. And remember," he added grimly, "we stopped them while following our rules of warfare." The unspoken implication hung in the air. What humans could do if they chose not to follow those rules. The High Counselor looked at the humans with new eyes, not with fear, exactly, but with a dawning respect tinged with horror. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we should revise our assessment of humanity's role in the galactic community." "Perhaps," Reed agreed diplomatically, "we should start by discussing those combat training facilities Captain Miller requested." The weeks following the station attack brought dramatic changes to human-alien relations. In the Stellar Empire's primary military academy, Captain Miller stood before a mixed class of alien and human security personnel. The room, once dominated by sleek energy weapons and automated defense systems, now featured a variety of basic human combat equipment. "Today," Miller announced, holding up a simple rope, "we're going to learn about human siege tactics." The alien students looked confused. The human students grinned. "But instructor," a tall alien cadet raised his hand, "our scanning systems show this is just a primitive fiber cord." "Exactly," Miller said, demonstrating a series of knots. "Sometimes the simplest tools are the most effective. Now, who can tell me how many ways this rope can be used in combat?" In another part of the station, Blue Eye watched archived footage of human conflicts with a mix of fascination and horror. The first speaker stood beside him, reviewing reports from their updated threat assessment teams. "Their entire history is filled with warfare," Blue Eye said quietly. "Not just against enemies, but against their own environment. They've fought in conditions that would kill most species." The first speaker nodded. "Look at this. They call it Arctic warfare. They intentionally train to fight in temperatures that freeze their water-based bodies." "Who does that?" "Humans do," Blue Eye replied. "They don't accept limitations. They adapt to overcome them." The footage showed human soldiers crossing deserts, scaling mountains, surviving in jungles. Each environment seemed more hostile than the last, yet humans had learned to fight in all of them. "We thought their short lives made them weak," the first speaker mused. "But it just meant they had to learn everything faster, become more efficient." In the station's diplomatic section, Ambassador Reed met with the High Counselor. The atmosphere was markedly different from their first meeting. Gone was the patronizing tone, replaced by careful respect. "Your Captain Miller's training programs are enlightening," the High Counselor said. "Though some of our military leaders are disturbed by the emphasis on what you call worst-case scenarios." Reed smiled diplomatically. "Humans believe in preparing for the worst while hoping for the best." "Yes, we've noticed." The High Counselor activated a holographic display showing human emergency protocols. "Your species has plans for every possible disaster. Natural, technological, even theoretical. You plan for equipment failures, power losses, environmental catastrophes. Because we've experienced most of them," Reed explained. "Every human disaster became a lesson, every failure a teaching moment." In the station's training area, Miller was demonstrating hand-to-hand combat techniques to a group of amazed alien security officers. They watched as he took down a training drone 3 times his size using leverage and momentum. "But why not rely on weapons?" one officer asked. "Because weapons can fail," Miller explained, helping another trainee with their stance. "Technology can fail. But if you train your body and mind, you always have options." The station's archives were busy too. Alien researchers pored over human military history, their previous dismissal of primitive human warfare replaced by intense study. They analyzed everything from ancient Roman legion tactics to modern special forces operations. Their entire civilization, one researcher noted, is built on adapting and overcoming. Even their entertainment reflects it. "Look at this," another called out, displaying human survival training manuals. They teach their civilians disaster preparation. Their children learn basic survival skills in something called scouting. In the station's command center, Blue Eye watched his security teams running Miller's new training exercises. The aliens were learning to fight without their advanced technology, to think tactically, to adapt. "We thought we were helping them," he said to the first speaker, "but they're teaching us." The first speaker nodded, watching a human instructor teaching alien cadets how to make weapons from everyday objects. "They're not just survivors," he realized. "They're teachers of survival." Throughout the station, the shift in perspective was clear. Where aliens had once seen primitive limitations, they now saw incredible adaptability. Where they had seen weakness, they now recognized carefully restrained strength. The humans, for their part, continued their duties with the same professional dedication as always. They knew what they were capable of. Now, finally, so did everyone else. 3 months after the station attack, the Grand Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with unprecedented activity. Representatives from every spacefaring race had gathered for what would become a historic moment. At the center of it all stood Captain Miller and Ambassador Reed, watching as alien leaders signed the first Galactic Geneva Convention. "Never thought I'd see this," Miller muttered, adjusting his formal uniform. "All because some terrorists made the mistake of cutting the power." Reed smiled slightly. Sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected teachers. A high counselor approached the podium, his tall form commanding attention. Unlike their first meeting, his posture now showed genuine respect when addressing the human representatives. "Today marks a new chapter in galactic history," he announced. "We gather not just to sign a treaty, but to acknowledge a profound truth, that true civilization lies not in the ability to wage war, but in the wisdom to limit it." Around the hall, screens displayed the new combat training programs being implemented across alien military academies. Human instructors taught alongside alien officers, sharing centuries of hard-earned wisdom about warfare and its costs. "Look at their faces," Miller said quietly to Reed, nodding toward a group of alien military leaders. 6 months ago, they thought we were pets. Now they're taking notes on our tactical training." Blue Eye, now promoted to Senior Security Commander, joined them. "The new mixed combat units are performing beyond expectations. It turns out humans have much to teach us about fighting without technology. And about fighting with honor," the first speaker added, approaching their group. He held up a tablet showing the newly ratified rules of warfare. "These restrictions, they make us stronger, not weaker." Reed nodded. "That's what humanity learned the hard way. Power isn't about what you can do. It's about what you choose not to do." The ceremony continued as more alien races stepped forward to sign. Each signature represented not just agreement to the rules of warfare, but acknowledgement of humanity's unique perspective on combat and peace. "The training facilities are fully booked for the next year," Blue Eye reported. "Every security force in the galaxy wants to learn human combat techniques." "Not just combat," the first speaker corrected. "Survival, adaptation, resourcefulness." He looked at Miller. "Your species thrives in conditions that would break most races. That's worth learning." In one corner of the hall, a group of alien children watched a demonstration by human scouts, learning basic survival skills with wide-eyed fascination. The same skills that aliens had once dismissed as primitive were now seen as essential knowledge. "We've also begun implementing your emergency protocols across all major stations," Blue Eye added. "Manual overrides, backup systems, alternative access routes, all based on human designs." Miller watched as another alien delegation signed the convention. "Funny how things work out. You thought you were getting harmless allies. Instead, we got teachers," the first speaker finished. "Teachers who showed us that true strength lies in knowing when not to use it." Ambassador Reed stepped forward as the final signatures were added. The document was modeled after Earth's own Geneva Convention, but expanded to address the unique challenges of galactic warfare. It stood as testament to humanity's influence on galactic society. "The galaxy was not ready for war," the High Counselor said privately to Reed. "We had advanced weapons, but no wisdom about their use, no understanding of the responsibility that comes with power. That's why we created the original Geneva Convention," Reed replied. "Not because we were peaceful, but because we understood exactly how destructive we could be." As the ceremony concluded, Miller stood at a viewport, watching ships from a dozen worlds dock at the station. Each one carried officers ready to learn from human instructors, to understand the delicate balance between power and restraint. "Think they finally get it?" Reed asked, joining him at the window. Miller watched an alien security team practicing human combat moves in a nearby training room. Their movements were careful, controlled, respectful of the power they were learning to wield. "Yeah," he said with a slight smile. "I think they do. They finally understand that being peaceful isn't the same as being harmless. The station's lights gleamed against the backdrop of space, a beacon of civilization in the darkness. Humanity had come to the stars expecting to learn from advanced aliens. Instead, they had become the teachers, showing the galaxy that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to choose peace instead.